Hey there, deep divers. It's Julie B. And today I'm bringing you part 2 of my deep dive into Severance, Season 2, Episode 2, Goodbye, Mrs. Selvig, with a particular focus on Helena's storyline. After a premiere episode that picked up where Season 1 left off, but only focused on the innies experience, we got the flip side here with the outies experience, again starting at the exact moment where the Season 1 finale ended. This is not a recap. I'll offer a brief overview of important events while offering my own interpretation and theories. I'll give you my take on what happened with Irving and Dylan's outies and Harmony and Cobel as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with Helena. We don't see the immediate aftermath of when she was dragged off stage in the season 1 cliffhanger, but we catch up with her as she stares out a window alone, her hand on her neck. So just from this gesture, we can see that she's clearly triggered by her innie invading her space, reminded of when Helly tried to unalive herself through hanging in season 1. This had to be traumatic for Helena. We never got to see the aftermath of that event from her side. And seeing her vulnerability here, it humanizes her. Unsurprisingly for me, because this show is too smart to create a two-dimensional, cartoonish villain. We only got to see Helena in a couple of scenes in season 1, and she seemed downright evil then. Helly was so desperate to get out of Lumen that she threatened to cut off her own fingers, demanding that her outie allow her to quit. Instead, Helena records a video telling Helly, "I am a person, you are not. I make the decisions, you do not." This made her sound like an ice-cold sociopath. But this season, I think we'll discover more and more regarding the pressure that Helena's family is inflicting upon her, and we'll learn that she did this Severance PR stunt, and probably that ruthless video for Helly, under duress to some extent. I'm already starting to sympathize with her a bit. After all, in the featurette at the end of this episode, episode 2, creator Dan Erickson said that Helly R is loved, appreciated, and respected in a way that Helena never has been. This is a huge insight into her character, and a possible motivation for her to actually choose to switch places with Helly just to experience what that feels like. After watching episode 2, I predicted that Helena would switch places with Helly of her own free will, so that she could experience the love and appreciation that she's never had in her life. Now, after have seen the reveal in episode 4 that she indeed switched places with Helly, I definitely think that this was at least part of her motivation. Sure, the company knew that she was acting as a mole for them, but I believe she also had a personal motivation for wanting to do this as well. Already from the little we've seen so far, Helena seems to lead a lonely existence and is not supported by her family. After Helly's invasion of her space, which seemed to be triggering for her, instead of offering support, her father, James Egan, enters, and instead of offering her any sympathy at all, he gets up in her face, his face contorts with contempt, and he calls her a fetid moppet. This is an insult that dates back to the 1600s, meaning foul-smelling child, and it's one of the most glaring examples of the strangely dated vernacular used by the Egans and Lumen employees. The show's creator, Dan Erickson, said at the Vancouver Film Festival that they created the fictional town of Keir PE to be like a place somewhat frozen in time, which explained the dated language. Getting back to this scene, Helena starts to respond saying father, another dated term, as most people would currently say dad, but he just turns and leaves. She tells their lackey, Mr. Drummond, that they need to connect with the outies and find out who they spoke to. Helena instructs Milchick to go visit the outies and find out everything they said and who they said it to. He responds, "And shall I fire them?" Again, even just saying shall I is dated language. She responds, "Let Keir guide your hand." This is an example of the way in which the cultish language is becoming more overt this season. In season 1, it was already clear to me that there is a cult worshipping Keir, not just a company revering its founder. Cobel's shrine to Keir was the most obvious indicator that this is a cult. The handbook for the employees is also written in very biblical vernacular. The paintings of Keir and others produced by O&D for Lumen are pseudo-religious and biblical in style, as are their titles and subject matter. For instance, Keir taming the four tempers here. It's reminiscent of a vengeful Old Testament God. The company handbook is written in this type of style too. But this season, the fact that this is a cult is irrefutable and much more blatant. Again, Helena tells Milchick, "Let Kira guide your hand," and Milchick acts as if this is a perfectly normal thing to say. So I think it's safe to say both Helena and Milchick are most likely true believers and brainwashed into this cult, drunk on the Kool-Aid, as I think Harmony Cobel is as well. The notion of this long-dead Kier guiding Milchick's hand is indicative of a cult. Helena must have been indoctrinated into the cult from the time she was born, so she's been brainwashed into believing that the ruthless behavior of her family towards the Innies is normal. Also, she was most likely taught from a young age that Innies are inferior. Remember, prejudice is not something that we're born with. Our family, the people around us, and the culture in which we live, that's where prejudice comes from. So as creator Dan Erickson has said, Helena believes that Innies are subhuman. And it's going to be a strange journey for her this season as she realizes that her Innie, even as she's trapped in Lumen, is ironically leading a richer and freer life than she herself is on the outside. Innie Helly is experiencing love, respect, and appreciation. She'll find herself envying this supposedly subhuman creation, Helly. For instance, already in this masterful scene, Helena watches the surveillance footage and we can see a hint of a smile on her face, and then shock as she sees Helly and Mark kissing. She switches to a different camera feed to get a closer look and replays it multiple times, staring at them, as if she's envying this thing that they have, something that she's never experienced. Then we get this exquisite close-up of her eye watching the footage, with the reflection of Helly and Mark kissing in her pupil. This is a strong hint that she's already starting to envy Helly, as she discovers that Helly is experiencing this love and appreciation that she's never known. So she definitely has an incentive to want to go in and masquerade as Helly, just to know how that feels. In episode 4, Helena, who is revealed as having acted as a mole for Lumen, actually sleeps with Mark while pretending to be Helly, so she definitely does seem to envy the connection that Helly has with him. Her feelings seem genuine in their scenes together, actually, though, especially when she said, "I'm ashamed of who I am on the outside." I actually don't think that was a lie. It seemed authentic to me. I believe she really is ashamed of being an Egan in some ways, and the things that she's complicit in because she's an Egan, the abuses that they commit. But anyway, getting back to episode 2, after hearing the recording of Mark pleading with the board to bring his team back, Drummond says that the board will give Mark what he wants, including Helly R, because, quote, "he won't finish without them," unquote. Helena doesn't seem to have any say in this at all. The board made the decision. She just sits there quietly and turns her gaze downward, as if she's used to being coerced into things by her family and the board. Her silence in this scene speaks volumes on that. Judging by her silence and body language, at this point, she seems reticent about going back in, even if she'd be going in as a mole and could experience the love that Helly has. She has a deeply ingrained prejudice against Innies, so the notion of doing that is probably repulsive to her, having to pretend to be one of them and be so close to them every day. As for Drummond's statement that Mark won't finish without his team, meaning he won't finish the Cold Harbor file, in other words, refining data on the chip in Miss Casey's head, in my opinion, check out my video, Gemma and Lumen's Endgame, for more on my theory about this topic. Another sign that Helena is under duress is her body language as she records a mea culpa video, taking responsibility for Helly's outburst at the gala. She claims that she made a poor decision to consume alcohol while on a non-lumen medication for an arm rash, so what she said was just a drunken outburst that she thought was funny at the time, but it was a lie. Helena says that she realized her actions affect real people around the world, and for the fear and insecurity this has caused, I must sincerely atone, she says. She's using religious language here, again, indicative that this is a cult worshipping Kier. And how exactly is she supposed to atone for this? That begs the question. This wasn't her fault at all, although her father seemed to inexplicably blame her when he called her a fetid moppet. Helena also says that distrust of Lumen has been sadly endemic since its founding. She says, "My words provided more fuel for pernicious hate and derision." So apparently the public has always been suspicious of Lumen, as they should be. This must be why they resorted to the desperate measure of having Helena get severed. If an Egan is willing to do that, then it will help to normalize severance for others and in the eyes of the masses. Finally, she says, quote, "I'm committed to this company with every part of me, but I'm also human, just like my innie and just like you," unquote. She's saying she's committed to this company with every part of her, even though that's a bald-faced lie. The Helly part of her certainly isn't committed. She's desperate to escape. And Helena actually views Helly as subhuman, not human at all, according to creator Dan Erickson. When she shuts off the camera, Helena looks dejected here. I think she's been forced to make the video and feels humiliated by it. However, she doesn't show a sensitive, human side to herself with others. In her meeting with Cobel, she's ice cold. She clearly has to put on a mask and pretend she's fine around other people. She tells Cobel that they've commandeered the footage taken by guests. Natalie's doing outreach to the media, and the severed employees are being dealt with. So it sounds like Lumen is doing everything it can to quash this story, even confiscating the footage of Helly's speech from the gala guests. Thus, as I predicted in my episode 1 breakdown, Lumen is lying to the innies about them being famous around the world and celebrated for their bravery. We also see in this episode that Dylan and Irving are immediately fired, certainly not celebrated, as I'll get into in a bit. Helena thanks Cobel for acting so quickly and saving them from disaster, since Cobel had called Milchick to warn him that Dylan must have triggered the overtime contingency protocol and he was able to shut it down. Yet Jamie Egan and the board still can't be bothered to speak to Cobel themselves, to Cobel's chagrin. Helena says she personally owes Cobel a debt of gratitude, and she responds, "It cost me dearly." This must be a reference to season 1, when Helly attempted to unalive herself and Cobel covered it up from her superiors. She ended up being fired as a result. For some reason, Helena must not have wanted the Lumen executives and her father to know about the incident, and Cobel agreed to cover it up, for reasons I'm still unsure about. Anyway, Helena makes note of the fact that Cobel still proved her loyalty and they'd like to ask her back. At Cobel's request, she apologizes on behalf of herself, her father, and the board. Cobel recommends they do damage control by scouring the surveillance footage and interviewing Dylan. Her instincts on what they should do next are correct, and she did come through for them in a big way by alerting them to the MDR team's coup, but the company still wants to use her as a scapegoat for what happened as they do damage control. Cobel's invasion of Mark's personal life, pretending to be a lactation consultant to push her way into his sister's orbit as well, that is something that could bring negative attention to the company now that she's been exposed, so I can see why they don't want to allow her to manage the severed floor anymore. And Mark's innie told Devin that he was being abused, so Milchick needed to contain that damage by blaming it all on Cobel. So Helena brushes her off here and says instead she wants to promote her to spearhead a new initiative called the Severance Advisory Council, claiming they value her expertise. But Cobel is too smart to fall for this, and she seems to recognize it as a way to give her busy work and pacify her. She feels that she should be the one running the severed floor, but Helen Milchick has been promoted to manager. Before she leaves and says she'll think about the offer, Cobel states, "You don't value me, you fear me." Helena responds that they fear no one, but I think Cobel is right. If they didn't fear her, they would just keep her unemployed by the company. But after what she just did for them, they're throwing her this bone to try to pacify her instead of simply cutting ties. After the events of this night, they recognize how effective and cunning she really is, so she could be a threat to them if they simply write her off, as they did before when they fired her. After all, The only reason why Cobel was able to alert them to the actions of the MDR crew is because she had maneuvered her way into Mark's life in such an ingenious manner. As Adam Scott said in the end of the credits featurette, Cobel is a genius, which is part of why she's so dangerous. Later in the episode, we get a gorgeous shot of Helena by herself, as seen from a distance through the glass floor-to-ceiling windows, pacing around. This is a perfect way to illustrate her sense of isolation. She doesn't seem to have people to lean on and support her like Helly does. Being born into the Egan family might seem like a privilege, but it comes with a huge burden and a sense of isolation. Moving on in episode 2, other significant events include Milchick firing both Irving and Dylan. Let's tackle Irving first. Oddly, the story doesn't pick up right where it left off, with Irving where we left him at the end of season 1. We don't get to see what happened when his Audi woke up while pounding on Bert's door. We don't know if Irving was able to talk to Bert or not. I think there must be a reason why we weren't shown this missing piece of the story, and it will be revealed later. Instead, we see Irving when he's already back home. He answers the door for Milchick and lies about what he's been doing that night. He says he was watching The Barber of Seville on TV, and he lies because he doesn't want to reveal what he was really doing, which would give away the fact that he has the names and addresses of many severed employees, and he was at Bert's house. Milchick tries to pump him for information but has no luck, and then fires Irving. Irving says, "You can't just do that," offering to pay for any damage if he broke something. Clearly, he's a man on a mission, investigating Lumen, and doesn't want to lose that job as a result. He may be a professional detective in some regard, but I think he's just going rogue and being a self-appointed detective. I think it's pretty clear that he's intentionally depriving himself of sleep. In season 1, we saw that he blasts rock music at night and paints the testing floor hallway many times over. I believe he's using sleep deprivation to try to get messages back and forth between him and his innie subconsciously. This is why Innie Irving keeps falling asleep at his desk and seeing the black goo, which we now know to be the paint that he uses as an Audi. And it works both ways. By being so sleep deprived, that's probably how the memory of the testing floor hallway came through. It bled through from his innie consciousness to his Audi. Later in episode 2, Irving leaves his Lenora Lake apartment complex, named after one of the Egan CEOs like many other locations in the town of Keir, and he goes to make a phone call at a phone booth nearby. He must be afraid that his phone could be tapped. And I have to note, the presence of a phone booth is yet another anachronistic piece of technology in the show, like the old cars and computers. Again, the showrunners wanted to create this town that seems like it's kind of frozen in time, which makes sense if it's dominated by a cult. Anyway, Irving talks to an unidentified person on the phone saying, "Okay, you're not picking up. I get it. I want you to know my innie got the message." It's unclear to whom he's speaking and what the message was, but we know that he's engaging in some type of espionage into Lumen based on the season 1 finale. Perhaps he's talking to Ragabi, who's working to reintegrate severed people. Irving had a list of severed employees and all kinds of information he'd compiled about them, in some cases their addresses. And like I said, he seems to be trying to send messages to his innie subconsciously through sleep deprivation, so this could be what he's referring to on this phone call. I'm guessing that he thinks that he successfully influenced his innie's behavior by sending this subconscious message to him, resulting in his innie participating in the coup to wake himself up on the outside. The twist here is that Bert pulls up behind him in a car and sits there watching him, looking rather sinister, I have to say. Again, we didn't get to see what happened when Irving's Audi woke up at Bert's door. We don't know if Bert answered the door or if they spoke to each other at all. There's a big missing piece to the story here. But based on this scene, even if Bert didn't open the door, he knew it was Irving outside, I would say, and he's now following him. Could he still be working for Lumen on the outside now, spying on Irving as he conducts his covert investigation into Lumen? Or is he just following him because his Audi has feelings for him, just like his innie did? I don't know. He looks awfully sinister to me. We'll have to wait and see on that, but the expression on Bert's face doesn't look friendly at all. Moving on to Dylan, in the immediate aftermath of the Macrodat Rebellion, he goes home with an ice bag on his head. Milchick visits him that night and fires him, lying to Dylan that he instigated a violent altercation at work, when in reality it was Milchick who tackled him. Dylan asks, "What am I going to tell my wife?" Milchick merely says, "I'm sorry," and leaves, as we get an overhead view of what looks like another Lumen housing complex, where Dylan lives, with all identical buildings, and an island in the center with an upside-down Lumen logo, the teardrop. So it's clear now that Milchick lied to Mark when he said that their innies were being celebrated as heroes around the world. It's quite the opposite. Aside from Mark, they were abruptly fired for their actions, whereas Mark was offered a raise. As I explained in my theory video on Gemma and Lumen's endgame, I think this is a clue that Mark's job in MDR is the only one of real importance to Lumen, at least in this department anyway, and only he can complete the data refining of the Cold Harbor file, which is essentially the chip in Miss Casey's head. Later in this episode, Dylan has a job interview at a company called Great Door, which is clearly a reference to a mind-numbing job that the creator of Severance, Dan Erickson, had when he came up with the idea for this show, as he revealed on their podcast. The interviewer looks almost like a clone of Dylan, and this is emphasized by this shot of them facing each other, almost a mirror image, as they have similar body types, hair, beard, complexion, and glasses. The interviewer even tells Dylan, "You remind me of me." It's like, no matter where Dylan goes, even if he doesn't work at Lumen, he can't escape the duality of his identity now, and this is a reminder of that. But when he mentions that he was a severed worker, the interviewer turns on him and says he thinks severance is abhorrent. Dylan declares this is discrimination, which it is. So apparently there is discrimination against severed people in American society on this show. After the interview, Dylan talks to his wife on the phone, who sounds kind and encouraging. He asks if they need more baby wipes, and as we later will learn in episode 3, Milchick wasn't lying when he told Dylan he had 3 kids in season 1. This is the reason why Dylan must have gotten severed. He was desperate to find a way to support his 3 kids. During his interview at the door factory, he asked about their health insurance plan, so clearly the need to support his family was his motivation for taking a severed job. Apparently, he has had trouble keeping jobs, as we also learn in episode 3. Ultimately, because Mark has refused to do his work unless the company brings his team back, Dylan and Irving are invited back to work at Lumen, as Milchick shows up at their homes bearing pineapples like he did for Mark before. Again, check out my video Gemma and Lumen's Endgame for more on my take on why Lumen acquiesced to Mark's demand and brought them back, and why they were so easily expendable in the first place, while Mark was deemed essential enough to remain employed after the stunt that they pulled together. Incidentally, as this new employee, Mark W., is escorted out by security, he angrily yells, "This is unheard of! 3 days of work! I broke another lease at Grand Rapids." Then he threatens to sue. So apparently, they're just laying him off again and letting him go, which, coupled with the firing of Dylan and Irving, begs the question, how exactly does this work when Lumen fires people? Based on this episode, we've learned that Lumen just released these severed people, and the company doesn't seem concerned that these people could possibly remember privileged information about their work, or that they could seek reintegration to retaliate. At any rate, Dylan and Irving show up for work, and they each enter the elevator, but it doesn't show them transition to their innie selves. The doors just close. Then Helena enters, as a beam of light hits her red hair. When I saw that, I recognized it as a hint that she was going in as Helena, not Helly. Recall that red signifies an outie in Severance, and blue signifies the innie. That light hitting her red hair is a striking image. Also, she doesn't take off her watch, and she doesn't put on a different one, as we've seen Mark do. She leaves on the watch she came in with and gets on the elevator. This was another hint that she was going in as Helena to pose as Helly. Also, her elevator ride is a few seconds shorter than Irving and Dylan's elevator rides, and we don't hear a ding for her at the end. So again, these were hints that it was actually Helena. But I have to admit, at this point, I was still on the fence when it came to which one she actually is, Helena or Helly. I just wasn't sure because it remained ambiguous. There were clues pointing in both directions for me. Now, ultimately, we find out in episode 4 that it's Helena, and it's been Helena the whole time since the beginning of season 1. But I'll get into that in my future deep dives. So that's part 2 of my breakdown of Severance season 2, episode 2. Now, I want to know what you think. What do you think about the character of Helena, who we're finally getting to know? What did you think about Cobel's conversation with Helena? Do the Egans really fear her, as Cobel said? What did you think of Irving's secretive phone call and Bert secretly watching him? What did you think of that bizarre interview of Dylan's? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and check out my weekly Severance lives every Monday at 10 p.m. Eastern, as well as my watch parties in my Discord at 9 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays when the new episodes drop. And until next time, keep on deep diving, and let's see what we can uncover together.